Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. And today we're going to be talking about mental health in the business world, as I am joined by #1 international best-selling author, speaker, and co-founder of Executive Global Network, Nick Johnson. Nick is a person who helps senior executive leaders and business owners. He gives them a safe space to share their challenges, learn from each other, and receive support. So, Nick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much, Curtis, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you and to discuss this topic, which is so important to do cover. I know many times it's full of stigma and people prefer to not talk about it. So hats off to you, Curtis.
Well, Nick is straight from Singapore. So, Nick, why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yes, sure. So I was born in Sweden, but 1998, I moved to Australia to study, which is as far away basically as you can go in the world from Sweden. And down there, then I felt that it was a bit far away from home. So I moved halfway to Southeast Asia, and I spent the last 15 years living and working in Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and Singapore. And I held the various senior manager roles in big international firms. I worked my way up to basically a general manager, general director. And then since a few years ago now, I have changed and my life is different. I'm now a small business owner and creating a safe space for senior executives where they can discuss the work-related challenges.
Well, what made you want to get started in that and take kind of like a lead role or take the initiative to strictly want to help with executive mental health?
Well, I found myself in my career path quite lonely, and that is looking back at it. I hit rock bottom myself in 2018, and it was a downward spiral from 2015. So I went through 3 years of challenging times, both at home where I went through divorce, and then I lost appetite for exercising and I started to eat bad diet. And with that, I fell into a depression. And then I resigned from my work and I didn't really know where I was. So I was quite lost myself. And it's only when I hit rock bottom and I come back into recovery and looking back at the journey I had, I wish I had some support. I wish I spoke up about loneliness and how I felt in the workplace when I was there. So now, therefore, I'm changed my life to now support other executives when they are there, so they don't fall into the lows that I found myself in.
Well, tell us about you. You even set up a peer network for senior executives and business owners. So tell us about that peer network and tell them exactly what that peer network does.
Yes, so I'm running this network in Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia as of now. And it's really a safe place for senior executives to discuss their work-related challenges. What we then do is that we group the executives based on seniority, and they don't have any competitor inside the same group. They all sign a non-disclosure agreement so that they should feel that this is a private, confidential, safe place where they can discuss their work-related challenges. We also then provide a moderator, which is facilitating the discussions. They meet for 4 hours, 6 times a year. So this is really the times when they can prepare and come in and discuss the challenges they are facing in the work. It could be perhaps a conflict with a team. So it can be a challenge with managing upwards, managing the head office or the owners or the founders or anything else that they feel that they cannot discuss internally in the company with their colleagues. They bring that in here and get support than by getting other views, because most likely there's been someone who's been there before who can give them the sympathy and support.
Well, sometimes executives can feel lonely and suffer from isolation at work, I guess, because they, like you say, they got conflict and everybody wanting them to do this and do that or not liking them. But give some tips to people who are in these positions, how they can avoid workplace isolation.
Well, I would say that the key here is to dare to be vulnerable. We're trying to cover everything up in our lives, and I call it a smiling depression, where especially senior executives, they perhaps are paid a premium salary, they expected to handle the pressure, they are trying to hold it all together. And what we are forgetting is that they are humans too. They also go through challenges at home. They also have health issues from time to time. They can also go through some times of anxiety and perhaps even depression, and still trying to hold it together then is what brings this loneliness when you don't discuss with the people around you how you're feeling. So indeed, the solution is here to be vulnerable, to dare as a leader to also show that you are human. And if you are going through some challenges, try not to cover it up, but instead discuss it. And if you really, really cannot discuss it in your company because perhaps you think that it would damage your career if you expose yourself too much, then indeed go to a confidential place like a peer group, or go to a coach, go to a mentor, and discuss this so that you don't feel that you are suffering alone. Instead, by opening up and sharing your problem with someone, then immediately you will feel that the isolation is lifted from you.
Well, can you talk about how the mental health challenges has changed since the pandemic in the last 18 months? How is it different for these executives and business owners than it was in the past before the pandemic?
Well, I think that it has, first, it was a little bit challenging because everyone was working from home. And I did a survey before the pandemic of senior executives here where I live and work in Singapore, and it showed that 30% of the senior executives were suffering from loneliness from time to time. And when I did this survey in 2020, so in the middle of the pandemic, the numbers had doubled to 59%. So that means that, the executives were suffering more from loneliness, as they were then also working remotely from home, trying to run the organizations, many of them then in crisis mode and not being able to colleagues in person. So that was what we saw initially. But down the line, then when people and companies were working from home, we found ways to unite online. We started to have all hands meeting, all staff meeting, and people then decided to also to start opening up a little bit. The people started to ask, "Are you okay?" And people spoke up when they were asked. People started to feel that it's okay to say that I'm not okay. There was a lot of sympathy for each other, and in that sense, it was a positive change that we are at least starting to talk about mental health. And Curtis, I was invited to so many of these online events. I was back to back almost every day during the lockdowns, talking to companies, talking to executives, sharing my story then to try to inspire them to also dare to speak up about their challenges, and to show that it's okay to talk about the challenges we've gone through. So indeed, I saw a lot of positive changes, Curtis. And I just want to add one more thing here, and that is that during this time, many of the therapists and psychologists and so on started also to do online bookings. So perhaps before the pandemic, you had to go and see a psychologist, perhaps in a clinic, and many people would be shy to go there. Perhaps they're seen in the waiting room, and there's a lot of stigma around this. But now when everything here is also online, you can book a one-on-one session with a psychologist and do it perhaps from your office and close the door, or you can do it from your home, and you don't have to be seen. So therefore, the confidentiality is there. And that's what I heard from many executives, that they now finally also decided to go ahead and get some help because there's no stigma attached to it in that.
So for those who might be going through things but don't realize that, stuff like stress, workplace depression, isolation, and loneliness. Give some symptoms so people can detect and know that there might be an issue in the workplace.
Yeah, there's signs to look for, and specifically if you are living with a partner, or you have a close friend of yours, and if this person suddenly start to lose weight or gain weight, or they lose interest in a hobby. So if your wife or husband typically are playing the guitar, 1 or 2 hours every day because that's the biggest passion, and suddenly they stop playing the guitar, or you see a mother who lose interest in her baby suddenly, or let's say that for many years you've been cooking food together on a Saturday, and suddenly one of your partners have no interest in that. Those are all warning signs that something is not right. But on the outside, it's very difficult to tell normally on if a person is actually suffering in terms. We just trained so well to hide and to cover up for this. So that is the challenges here.
Well, tell the audience about your book. Tell us about, what listeners can expect when they read it and where you can get it and why you decided to write it and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I did a survey before the pandemic where I surveyed executives about loneliness and during the pandemic. And when I got those findings back, and I also did some interviews and so on, and the results really inspired me. I realized that I was onto something that people didn't really know. I then also interviewed a lot of executives one-on-one, and what I found out that there was a lot more suffering than I could ever imagine. So I shared these findings of both the survey and the interviews then with a local radio station and then with the newspaper, and it resulted in a 4 pages feature in the local business newspaper here in Singapore, which was at the time the biggest media exposure in the history of Singapore, covering mental health and loneliness. So this then went viral. And before I knew it, I was in so many different media interviews talking about that. And when I had this back, I received so much positive support. People wrote to me from all over the world saying that it was great I covered this topic, that, and they were saying my wife was suffering from a depression before, and, I didn't know it. And then they said that someone they knew had died of suicide and so on. They said, it's so good that we're talking about this. So that inspired me to take it to the next level. And I decided then to write a book. And the book I wrote in the name of a friend of mine who sadly died of suicide. He had been suffering, but no one knew about it. So I wish that, it was uncovered so we could have helped him, but he was also hiding behind that smile. So that was a message that I wanted to get out. And that's why I spent the time to write the book, complete it. And anyone who is interested in the book can look up the title. It's called Executive Loneliness. It's available on Amazon, but also for anyone who prefer to listen, it's also on Audible. It's not me who read it, it's a professional narrator. So that might be for anyone who want to listen to when they're exercising, or for that matter, if anyone is blind and prefer to listen to it, then the audiobook is there as well.
Sweet. Glad that you have an accessible way for everybody to check it out. Tell us about any current or upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to know about.
Yeah, so we are basically working on the peer networks, and here in Singapore we have more than 700 members now. It used to be mainly senior executives that were part of these groups, but what we realized during the lockdowns was that also business owners, small business owners, especially SMEs, were also suffering and could feel quite lonely and pressured. So we started to have those groups for SMEs, and that is now the fastest growing segment for us, where then you can be part of a group of other SMEs where you can learn about, cash flow management, exit plans, partnerships, marketing, and so on. So again, they come in and discuss the challenges and get support of that. So that's a big part of what I do in Singapore. And when it comes to Indonesia and Malaysia, these are developing countries where, this is a new concept, and it's so much stigma over there compared to in the West of opening up. And it's new concept for them. So we really have to practice that there, and spreading the message that it's okay to talk up. And of course, this is the first level before things get too serious. And I also want to add that outside of my professional workplace and the peer groups, I'm giving back as much as I can to the local society. I try to do something every day. I'm a fundraiser and volunteer for a suicide prevention agency over here, and also another mental health related organization, an anonymous organization for problem drinkers, so people who fall into alcohol addiction. And there I'm also trying to support and help out on a day-to-day basis, as much as I have time. So that's a little bit what I'm working on.
So is your peer group available only where you live, or do you do virtual worldwide?
There are these kind of peer networks all over the world. Also in the US, I know that it's quite popular for senior executives to belong to a peer group. So during the pandemic, some of them went online. Now a lot of it is back in person, because it is also quite important to meet in person. There's more trust in person. When you're online, people might be worried who else is listening or else is watching, or maybe someone could even record it. So we find that, there's more depth, there's more honesty, the conversation go deeper in person. So the best would be to join some local network where you live, and that would be my advice.
How can people connect with you and keep up with everything you're doing? Throw out your contact information, website, anything like that you have.
Yeah, so the book is very easy to find on Amazon, Executive Loneliness. And as for myself, I'm quite active on LinkedIn, where they can look up Nick Jonsson. That's the Swedish spelling. It's Nick, and Jonsson is Jonsson. And I'm happy to connect with people on LinkedIn.
Okay, we'll close this out with some final thoughts, maybe something that I failed to talk about that you would like to touch on, or just any final thoughts that you might have for the audience before we close it out.
Yes, I would love to end with to say that one more finding that we did, and that was that 85% of the executives didn't find it convenient or were not comfortable to discuss their work-related challenges or mental health issues with a boss. So please remember that if you are a senior executive, that find a way to talk about your issues, your challenges at the first stage before it becomes too severe. And if it is severe and you're going through depression, speak to a therapist, join some anonymous organization. Mental health support hotlines are there. The worst thing you can do is hold on to it and don't talk to anyone about it. So that's my final remark, and the advice to everyone, that don't do what I do, keep it inside myself, all the pain for 3 years. You don't have to hit rock bottom. Take action right now, and you will be on your way to feeling a lot better.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Jonsson, Jonsson. Please be sure to check him out. Follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. And if you know somebody that might be in need of one of these peer support groups, reach out and try to search and find. Now, Nick, if somebody needed a resource, how would they go about finding one of these peer support groups on the internet?
Well, there's so many. If you just go to Google and you put in a peer group or peer network, you will find a lot. It's peer-to-peer networks, and you will definitely find them in all cities in the US.
Yeah, maybe you can type in something like mental health peer-to-peer network. So if there's anybody out there that needs it, that's listening, or anybody, just forward them this episode and let them know how to find it. Nick, thank you so much for joining me today. For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.